The rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the roof of the old house. Each drop seemed to echo in the silence of the night, a low, constant thrum that wrapped around the small, dimly lit room. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and making the shadows dance. It was the kind of night that made the heart race, the kind that filled the mind with dark thoughts. Samantha sat curled up on the couch, a blanket wrapped tightly around her. She had always loved rainy nights, but tonight felt different. The storm outside felt alive, as if it were trying to communicate something sinister. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly midnight. The house creaked and groaned, settling into the dampness, but each sound felt like a warning. She was alone. Her parents had gone out for the evening, leaving her in charge. They had promised to be back before the storm got too bad. But as the hours passed, Samantha began to worry. She picked up her phone, checking for messages. Nothing. She sighed and tossed it aside. The power flickered, the lights dimming for a moment before stabilizing. She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The wind picked up, howling like a wounded animal. Samantha glanced out the window, the rain blurring her view of the dark street. She could barely make out the silhouettes of the trees, their branches swaying violently. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie. She shook her head, trying to dispel the thoughts that crept into her mind. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. Samantha jumped, her heart racing. "Mom!" That she called out, her voice trembling. No answer, just the relentless sound of the rain and the wind. She stood up, the blanket falling to the floor, and tiptoed toward the kitchen. The old wooden floor creaked under her weight, each step amplifying her fear. As she reached the doorway, she hesitated. The kitchen was dark, the only light coming from the flickering bulb above the sink. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The sound of dripping water filled the air, and she noticed that the window above the sink was wide open, rain pouring in and pooling on the floor. She rushed to close it, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Just the wind," she whispered to herself, trying to calm her racing heart. But as she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of her eye. A shadow flickered in the hallway just beyond the kitchen. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. Silence. She stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. The shadows seemed to thicken, wrapping around her like a cloak. She turned to grab her phone, but it slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. The screen cracked, but she didn't care. She needed light. She needed to see. With trembling hands, she picked it up and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the kitchen. Nothing. Just the rain-soaked floor and the open window. She turned slowly, scanning the hallway. The shadows danced, but there was no sign of anyone. "Get a grip, Samantha," she muttered, trying to steady herself. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a cold breath on the back of her neck. She backed away from the kitchen, her eyes fixed on the hallway. The wind howled again, louder this time, and she felt the urge to run. She bolted back into the living room, slamming the door behind her. She leaned against it, her heart racing. The rain continued to pound against the house, a relentless reminder of her isolation. She grabbed a pillow and hugged it to her chest, trying to find comfort in its softness. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time felt distorted, lost in the chaos of the storm. She tried to distract herself, flipping through TV channels, but nothing held her attention. The news anchors were talking about the weather, their voices drowned out by the storm outside. She switched it off, the silence amplifying her fear. Then a noise broke through the quiet. A soft thud, followed by a dragging sound. Samantha's heart dropped. She stood up, straining to listen. The sound came from the hallway again, closer this time. She took a step back, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it an animal? A thief? Or something worse? Mom, she shouted, her voice cracking. Dad, no response. Just the sound of the storm growing louder, more aggressively. She felt trapped, like a mouse in a maze, with no way out. Gathering her courage, she picked up a heavy lamp from the table, gripping it tightly. She moved toward the hallway, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Each step felt like a mile, the air thick with dread. The dragging sound continued, a slow, deliberate movement that sent chills down her spine. As she reached the end of the hallway, she paused, the light flickering. She shone it toward the source of the noise. There, just outside her parents' bedroom door, was a shadow. It was hunched over, its form indistinct in the darkness. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The figure didn't move. It just stayed there, a dark shape against the wall. She took a step closer, the lamp raised high, ready to strike. "I'm not afraid of you." But as she stepped into the light, the figure turned. Samantha gasped, stumbling back. It was a man, his face obscured by shadows, but his eyes glinted with something cold and empty. He smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that sent terror coursing through her veins. "Hello, Samantha," he said, his voice low and raspy. "I've been waiting for you." She turned to run, but he lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. She screamed, the sound echoing in the stillness of the house. The lamp fell from her hand, shattering on the floor. She struggled, fighting against his grip, but he was strong. The darkness closed in around her, swallowing her screams. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, pulling her closer. "It's just us now." With a sudden burst of adrenaline, she kicked him hard, breaking free from his grasp. She stumbled backward, her heart racing as she dashed toward the living room. The wind howled outside, a cacophony of chaos that matched her fear. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. She reached the front door, fumbling with the lock. Panic surged through her as she heard him closing in. Just as she turned the knob, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She screamed again, twisting around to face him. But there was nothing there. The hallway was empty, the shadows retreating into the corners. Samantha blinked, confusion washing over her. Had she imagined it? Had the storm played tricks on her mind? She stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Then she heard it again, a soft thud, followed by a whisper. "Samantha." She turned slowly, her breath hitching in her throat. The voice was closer now, echoing through the house. It was familiar but twisted, warped by something dark. "Samantha," it called again, a sickly sweet tone that made her skin crawl. She backed away, her mind racing. She had to get out. She had to escape. But the door was still locked, and the windows were too high to climb out of. The walls felt like they were closing in, the shadows creeping closer. Then she remembered the basement, the old cellar door in the kitchen. It was a long shot, but it was her only option. She turned and raced back to the kitchen, her heart pounding. The rain lashed against the window, a constant reminder of the storm outside. As she reached the kitchen, she saw the basement door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning her closer. She hesitated, fear gripping her. But the whispering voice grew louder, more insistent. "Samantha, come play." With a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was cold and damp, the smell of mold filling her nostrils. She grabbed the flashlight and flicked it on, illuminating the narrow staircase that led down into the darkness. Each step creaked under her weight, the sound echoing in the silence. She could hear the rain pounding above her, a steady rhythm that matched her heartbeat. As she reached the bottom, she shone the light around the small room. It was filled with old boxes and forgotten memories, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. But there was something else. In the corner, something shifted. She pointed the flashlight toward it, her breath catching in her throat. A figure was huddled there, shrouded in darkness. It looked up at her, its eyes glowing in the dim light. "Samantha," it whispered, a voice that sent chills down her spine. It was her own voice, twisted and distorted. "Join me." She stumbled back, terror flooding her senses. The figure stood up, revealing a shadowy version of herself, eyes hollow and empty. "You can't escape," it said, its voice echoing in the small room. "We are one." "No," Samantha screamed, turning to run back up the stairs. But as she reached the top, the door slammed shut. She pounded on it, desperation clawing at her throat. "Let me out! Let me out!" The whispers grew louder, filling the air with a cacophony of voices. "Samantha, stay with us. Join us." She pressed her back against the door, heart racing. The shadows danced around her, closing in. She could feel their cold breath on her skin, their fingers reaching for her. "No," she cried, fighting against the darkness. With one final push, she threw herself against the door. It creaked open, and she stumbled into the kitchen, gasping for breath. The rain still poured outside, the storm raging on. She dashed to the front door and flung it open, stepping out into the downpour. The cold rain hit her like a slap, but she didn't care. She ran down the street, her heart pounding in her chest. The storm howled around her, but she kept moving, desperate to escape the darkness that had consumed her home. As she ran, she could hear the whispers fading behind her, the shadows retreating into the night. She glanced back, her heart racing, but there was nothing there, just the empty house and the relentless storm. Samantha kept running, the rain soaking her to the bone. She didn't stop until she reached the corner of the street, panting and gasping for air. She turned to look back at her home, the dark silhouette of the house looming in the distance. And then she saw it. A figure standing in the doorway, watching her. It was her. The twisted version of herself grinning in the darkness. The whispers echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the night she had tried to escape. "Samantha, come back." She turned and ran, the storm swallowing her screams, the darkness closing in around her once more. The rain poured down, a torrent that seemed to wash away the last remnants of her sanity. She felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, the shadows lurking just beyond her sight. As she sprinted down the street, she could feel the darkness chasing her, a relentless force that refused to let go. The wind howled, whipping her hair around her face, blinding her as she ran. She stumbled, her foot catching on a crack in the pavement, and she fell hard to the ground. Pain shot through her ankle, but she pushed herself up, not daring to look back. The whispers were louder now, a chorus of voices that filled her mind. "Samantha, you can't escape. Join us." She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to keep moving. She needed to find somewhere safe, somewhere the shadows couldn't reach her. She spotted a small diner at the end of the street, its neon sign flickering in the storm. Hope surged within her, and she sprinted toward it. As she reached the door, she yanked it open and stumbled inside, gasping for breath. The warmth enveloped her, a stark contrast to the cold rain outside. The diner was empty, the booths dark and silent. She felt a momentary sense of relief, but the whisper still echoed in her ears. "Help," she cried out, her voice trembling. "Is anyone here?" No answer. Just the sound of the rain pounding against the windows. She moved deeper into the diner, her heart racing. The kitchen door swung slightly ajar, and she hesitated. Should she go in? Was it safe? But the whispers grew louder, filling her mind with dread. "Samantha, they won't help you. You belong with us." She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. "No, I won't let you take me," she shouted, her voice breaking. She turned and ran toward the back door, desperate to escape. As she reached for the handle, the door swung open and a figure stepped inside. It was a woman drenched from the rain, her hair plastered to her face. "Samantha," she called, her voice shaky. "Is that you?" Samantha's heart raced. "Who are you?" she demanded, stepping back. The woman looked familiar, but the shadows danced around her, obscuring her features. "I'm your sister, Lily," the woman said, her eyes wide with fear. "I came to find you. We need to get out of here." Samantha hesitated, torn between trust and fear. "You're not real," she whispered, backing away. "You're just another shadow." "No," Lily cried, reaching out to her. "I'm here to help you, please." But the whispers grew louder, drowning out Lily's voice. "Samantha, don't listen to her, she's one of us." Samantha squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the voices. "No, I won't let you take me," she shouted, her voice breaking. She turned and ran, bursting through the back door and into the alley behind the diner. The rain poured down, mixing with her tears as she stumbled into the darkness. She could hear the whispers following her, the shadows closing in. "Samantha, join us. We are waiting." She ran blindly, her heart pounding in her chest. The alley twisted and turned, but she couldn't stop. She had to escape. She had to escape. She had to find safety. As she rounded a corner, she spotted an old church at the end of the street, its steeple piercing the stormy sky. Hope surged within her, and she sprinted toward it. The heavy wooden doors were slightly ajar, and she pushed them open, stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the flickering candles cast long shadows across the pews. "Samantha," a voice echoed from the shadows. It was soft, almost inviting. "You're safe here." She turned, her heart racing. There, in the dim light, stood a figure cloaked in darkness. It was a man, his face obscured, but his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "You've come to the right place," he said, his voice smooth and soothing. "Who are you?" Samantha demanded, backing away. "What do you want?" "I want to help you," he said, stepping closer. "You're not alone anymore. You belong with us." The whispers grew louder, swelling around her, filling her mind with dread. "Samantha, you cannot escape. Join us." "No," she screamed, shaking her head. "I won't let you take me." She turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside. The man smiled, a slow, chilling grin that sent shivers down her spine. "You can't run from your fate, Samantha. You are one of us now." She felt the shadows closing in, their cold fingers reaching for her. Panic surged through her veins as she fought against the darkness. "No, I won't give in," she shouted, pushing past the man and racing down the aisle. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that filled her mind. "Samantha, you belong with us. Join us." She reached the altar, the candles flickering in the darkness. She grabbed one, holding it up like a weapon. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice trembling. The shadows hesitated, swirling around her, but keeping their distance. "Please, Samantha," the man said, his voice low and soothing. "You don't have to fight. Embrace the darkness. It will give you strength." But she shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to be like you," she cried, her voice breaking. "I want to be free." With a surge of adrenaline, she threw the candle at the man. It missed him and shattered against the wall, flames erupting into the air. The fire spread quickly, licking at the wooden beams of the church. The shadows recoiled, their whispers turning into screams of rage. "Foolish girl," the man shouted, his eyes blazing with fury. "You cannot escape your destiny." Samantha turned and ran, dodging the flames as they consumed the altar. She burst through the back door, stumbling into the alley once more. The rain poured down, but the fire burned bright behind her, illuminating the darkness. She ran, her heart pounding, the whispers fading into the distance. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of town, the storm raging around her. The wind howled, but she felt a sense of freedom wash over her. As she stood there, gasping for breath, she realized she was finally free. The darkness that had haunted her was behind her, consumed by the flames. She turned to look back at the church, its silhouette flickering in the storm. But then she saw it, a figure standing in the doorway, watching her. It was the man, his face twisted in rage. "You can't escape, Samantha," he shouted, his voice echoing through the rain. "You are mine." Samantha turned and ran, the storm swallowing her screams, the darkness closing in around her once more. She sprinted down the road, the rain soaking her to the bone. But this time she didn't look back. She knew she had to keep moving, to stay ahead of the darkness that sought to claim her. The whispering voices faded into the storm, but she could still feel their presence.